Let's talk about the medical examiner in the Shanquella Robinson case. His name is Dr. René Galvan Oseguera. He is the forensic doctor who certified Shanquella's death certificate on November 4th. I'm not going to be critical of his credentials as some other creators have already done. No. Instead, I want to focus on this doctor's critical role in discovering truth, the only real language barrier in this case. That's right. Truth is the foreign language here, as no one involved seems to know how to speak it. Everyone has in some way omitted it, bent it, stretched it, and made statements completely devoid of it because they all have something to hide. But the medical examiner, he would have been the least motivated to hide anything. He wasn't at the scene. He had no connection to Shanquella, who was neither Mexican nor cartel connected. By all indications, Dr. Oseguera is an impartial participant. How do I know? Because his findings about Shanquella's injuries were consistent with what we all witnessed in the assault video. And more important is the fact that those findings were documented and shared with the family well before the assault video went viral. If you're anything like me, when you first heard that the cause and time of death on the death certificate were so different from what was stated on the police report, you may have thought that the medical examiner's findings were solely based on science and the condition of the body. But oh no, it is quite a bit more than that. We're going to get into it. We're going to get into the mind of the medical examiner, Dr. Oseguera, and shine light on why I think his estimated time of death is so starkly different from what Dr. Carolina stated on the police report. But first, be sure to click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on updates to this story, trending topics, and so much more. Now let's get into it. Talk to any coroner or medical examiner, and they will tell you that they have to use a lot of different techniques and observations to make an accurate time of death estimation. There are so many variables that can impact postmortem changes in the body that it's impossible for them to base their decisions solely on one or two factors like body temperature or rigor. Things like medications, environmental temperatures, and even body size can change the normal window for rigor and other postmortem phases to occur. Determining the precise moment of death is impossible, but the medical examiner can make a pretty accurate guess based on science, the condition of the body, witness statements, scene markers, and other available evidence. The rule of thumb is the sooner the body is examined, the better the chances of determining the time of death. They use a best evidence rule. Along with that, they must weigh the credibility of the evidence from the scene as well as from the statements of the witnesses. According to coronertalk.com, the medical examiner is the recognized expert and his opinion sticks. He is not like a homicide detective who builds his case on evidence and the statements of others while being careful not to insert his opinion. The medical examiner, on the other hand, makes the final decision about the time and cause of death. And when it comes to homicides, unless a second autopsy was done, his determination is generally not appealable in court. So each time the medical examiner declares a time of death estimation, his credibility is on the line. He is expected to have the knowledge and skill to calculate it accurately, and he must be able to stand by his opinion and articulate how he got there in court. The medical examiner is required to thoroughly document how he arrived at the time of death estimate. The autopsy report backs up his opinion and should also be able to stand on its own. When it comes to witness statements and scene markers, he must be able to establish fact from fiction. And he cannot base his determination on witness statements that he cannot establish as fact. Frankly, witnesses lie, whether it's intentional or not. In some cases, the statements may not be admissible in court. There's also the potential for reasonable doubt to be raised in court about witness statements. If the medical examiner relied on those statements, he would be left with nothing as a basis for his determination. Medical examiners say that determining time of death takes science with art applied to it. But there are rules of engagement. The medical examiner isn't supposed to comment or interpret what events transpired to cause a death. Instead, he is only to determine the time and scientific cause of death. For example, if a person dies of alcohol poisoning, it's not up to the medical examiner to determine if it was accidental or murder. That's for the police to sort out. The medical examiner is tasked with determining the cause of death without concluding if it was accidental or criminal. That's why we see the answer to line 24 on the death certificate was merely yes. Was it accidental or violent? Yes. Health.howstuffworks.com says the task is supposed to be objective, meaning that it isn't Dr. Oseguera's job to conclude if Shanquella's death was accidental or criminal. He is only to make a scientific explanation for her demise, and his determination was that Shanquella's injury was caused by either an accident or violence. This type of determination leaves room for the investigators to do their jobs, and it also allows the public to be confident that the medical examiner will expose the truth based on fact and science, not his personal interpretation. Gary Rogers, retired Canadian police homicide detective and investigative field coroner, says coroners and medical examiners use the most precise science available to them when determining the time of death. Then they look to see if the other case facts fit with the determination. In an investigation, whether it's criminal or otherwise, the medical examiner looks at the statements of the witnesses and the accused while also being very cautious about the potential for the cooking up of alibis. Are you catching my drift here? One of the biggest issues with Shanquella's case is the fact that the time of death from the doctor and the medical examiner don't match. We know that the Cabo Six wanted to create confusion around Shanquella's time of death. They cut the video before her death, then they used the maid, and then they used the doctor to create an alibi for themselves. The police report, the recently released 911 report, and the death certificate look like they come from three disparate cases, don't they? The police report says Shanquella died between 4:49 p.m. and 6 p.m. The Attorney General recently alleged that she was dead at 4:37 p.m. when they called 911, and the death certificate says 3 p.m. Question for all the critical thinkers out there. If Shanquella was deceased when they called 911 at 4:37 p.m., why does the 911 operator dispatch the medics at 4:42 p.m. for a convulsing patient? And then again at 5 p.m., they request that the police support the medical unit since they are treating a person who is convulsing. Was she deceased or convulsing at 4:57 p.m. when the police were dispatched? And if Shanquella was deceased at 4:37 p.m. when they called 911, why would they perform CPR at 5:19 p.m. when the paramedics arrived almost an hour later? These are common sense questions. Let me know your response in the comments. Is this more inconsistencies, more confusion, more cover-up, or is this an attempt to protect Dr. Carolina? Attorney General, did you look at the things that Dr. Carolina said she was doing while on the 911 call? Yet none of it was captured in this 911 report? And you wonder why we are so angry and question your true intent with this case. Some say you have no intention to prosecute this case. They say you've done the minimum to make it look like the U.S. is the holdup, and then, in effect, you've closed the case. Is this true, sir? My research has also revealed that there are three classifications for the term time of death. There's a physiological time of death. That's when the heart and lungs cease to function. There's a legal time of death. This is the time when someone discovers a body or when a doctor pronounces someone deceased, which could inevitably be after they have tried to revive them. And there's an estimated time of death. This is the time of death that is given by the coroner or medical examiner after his examination of the body, scene markers, witness statements, and other available evidence. Now, there is something critical you should know. When there is a medical professional, such as a doctor, on the scene who witnesses the actual death, meaning the time when the heart and the lungs cease to function, when that happens, at least two of these times should match or very closely correlate. See it here at coronertalk.com. At minimum, the physiological time of death and the estimated time of death should match. The legal time of death could be later because the pronouncing of a death could be done following efforts to save the patient. But the physiological and the estimated time of death should match. But why not in this case? Somehow, despite Dr. Carolina's presence and her statements, they don't match. Isn't that interesting? Why? According to coronertalk.com, the only absolutely accurate determination of the time of death is the extremely uncommon circumstance in which a person died with a physician or other skilled medical professional present. Funny, we have that very scenario in Shanquella's case, yet the medical examiner's time doesn't match Dr. Carolina's. Let's give an example to better illustrate this. Say the doctor arrives at 3:15 p.m. and the patient, Shanquella, is not doing so well. So the doctor begins working with her. Then according to the physician on scene, her heart stops at 4:49 p.m. p.m., and the doctor administers CPR until 5:57 p.m. The medical examiner's report should read as follows. Physiological time of death, 4:49 p.m. Legal time of death, 5:57 p.m. Estimated time of death, 4:49 p.m. or thereabouts. It's an estimate, but it doesn't say that. Why? I don't need to see the autopsy report to know that it doesn't say that. Dr. Oseguera put his estimated time of death on Shanquella's death certificate, and I think Dr. Oseguera was sending a strong message by doing so. In the early morning hours on October 30th, 2022, Shanquella's lifeless body was transferred to the medical examiner's office. And just before the transfer was complete, someone transcribed and entered the data from the police report into the ambulance's 911 report. Once the body was signed over to the medical examiner, it remained in his legal possession until further arrangements were made. And while Dr. Oseguera was in legal possession of Shanquella's body, his number one priority was to determine how and when she died. Before he conducted the autopsy, Dr. Oseguera likely gathered all of the information that was provided to him about Shanquella's case. This would include the 911 report, the police report, which included Dr. Carolina's statement, and everything that led to Shanquella's demise, everything about the location where she was found, the pictures of the scene, and any circumstances surrounding her death. PracticalHomicide.com says the estimate of time of death is complex. Before the medical examiner locks himself into a specific time frame, it is imperative that all of the information available be examined. If the time of death tends to fix responsibility for the death or becomes the factor that points the finger at a particular suspect, then the estimate must be based on positive facts. So after reviewing the information, Dr. Oseguera likely began the autopsy with a careful external inspection of the body. According to livescience.com, this can help establish identity, locate evidence, or suggest a cause of death. Then Dr. Oseguera likely weighed and measured the body, noting Shanquella's clothing and her physical characteristics such as hair color and length, eye color, gender, age, and ethnicity. Then after removing her clothing, Dr. Oseguera examined her body, searching for residue of any kind, marks, scars, tattoos, or injuries. He may have used an ultraviolet light to locate certain types of residues. Then he likely followed with x-rays to reveal bone abnormalities. The doctor spotted the dislocation of her C1 cervical vertebrae and noted it. Then Dr. Oseguera likely took hair and nail samples. LiveScience.com says that throughout the autopsy, the pathologist records everything on a body diagram and in recorded verbal notes. If an internal examination is called for, the medical examiner investigates the pertinent internal organs. Then tissue samples are taken and stomach contents tested. Live Science says the pathologist and lab technicians also test bodily fluids for drugs, infection, chemical composition, or genetic factors, depending on the purpose of the autopsy. Dr. Oseguera likely tested for blood alcohol levels and ruled it out as the cause of death. LiveScience.com also says that the medical examiner may preserve samples they have taken, particularly if they find something unusual or abnormal. Throughout the examination, Dr. Oseguera took very detailed notes about the following: body temperature, rigor mortis, liver mortis, degree of putrefaction, stomach contents, corneal cloudiness, vitreous potassium level, insect activity, scene markers, and he ran the necessary tests and calculations to make his final determination. Then he likely went back to the evidence to see if the case facts lined up. Dr. Oseguera sees Dr. Carolina, a fellow medical professional, was there at the scene. He likely reread her statement that Shanquella's heart ceased to function at 4:49 p.m., that Dr. Carolina performed CPR with one of the friends, then later with the help of the medics, she continued CPR, applied shocks and adrenaline for a total of 1 hour and 8 minutes. He looks at the scene photos for corroboration. Then he sees that Dr. Carolina declared Shanquella deceased at 5:57 p.m. Dr. Oseguera likely took note of that legal time of death, 5:57 p.m., and probably reran his calculation to be sure. He maybe looks at the 911 report again and sees the paramedics informed the 911 operator of the infarcted person, a person who had succumbed to cardiac arrest at 5:19 p.m. And he likely wonders why the police were responding to a call for help for a convulsing person at 5 p.m. because his calculations say something totally different. Dr. Oseguera could smell the cooking up of alibis and knew that this case depended on his findings to be as accurate as possible. He likely thought about Dr. Carolina being on the scene and goes over all of her statements, but just could not establish them as fact. They made no sense. But one thing made complete sense to Dr. Oseguera. By 3 p.m., Shanquella had died. Then at 3:15 p.m., Dr. Carolina arrived. Shout out to all of my sources: livescience.com, exploreforensics.co.uk, coronertalk.com, staminacomfort.com, practicalhomicide.com, Gerardo Zuniga. Justice for Shanquella.